Good day, children. I hope you are all doing well at home. You are welcome back to our class, our online class. I'm going to be taking you history, and this is our second topic. Our last topic, or rather the first topic we took before, that was last week, was indigenous people of the state. Indigenous people of the state, and we learned that the indigenous people of the state are the natives, or the people whose grandparents and parents were born and brought up in that particular state or in that particular community. Okay? And they can also be called natives or indigenes. The indigenous people of the state can also be called natives or indigenes. We learned that Nigeria, being a nation made up of 36 states, and each state have their own natives or indigenes. Is that clear? That's what we learned last week. Today's topic is types of indigenous people. Let's say it again. Types of indigenous people. I told you last week that the word indigenous comes from the word indigene. Indigene. From the word indigene, you get indigenous. Okay? And we have three types of indigenous people. Let's say together, three types of indigenous people. The first type of indigenous people are the natural indigenous people. Let's say it again. The natural indigenous people. Natural, from the word nature. So these natural indigenous people are the original natives of the states. Why? Because their grandparents, or you can refer back, their great-grandparents, then their grandparents and their parents were born and brought up in that state. I used an example last week. I said, if your granddaddy was from Edo State, and then your daddy was also born in Edo State, it means you, as a child, you come from Edo State. Is that clear? If your name is Etiosa, or if your name is Osarogwe, it means you are from Edo State. Why? Because your grandparents and your parents were born in Edo State. And by that, you are one of the natural indigenous people of Edo State. Is that clear? All right, let's go to the second type of indigenous people. That is the non-indigenous people. Let's say it again. Non-indigenous people. These non-indigenous people are the people in the state who are not natives of the state. They are not natives of the state. Why? Because their grandparents and their parents were not born or brought up in that state. And so they are non-indigenous people. For example, if Mr. A, assuming Mr. A's name is Mr. Chukudi, Mr. Chukudi travels, Mr. Chukudi comes from Abia State. By right, he's an Igbo man, isn't it? And then he travels to live in Kano. Kano is mainly dominated by the Hausa people. Okay? So Mr. Chukudi is a native of Abia State, and he travels to live in Kano. He will not change his name from Chukudi and start to answer Musa. No, his name remains Chukudi. While living in Kano State, if he is asked, Mr. Chukudi, where do you come from? Which state do you come from? He will not start claiming Kano State. No. He will tell you that he comes from Abia State. That is to say he's a native or is an indigene of Abia State. But he just traveled to come and do business in Kano State. And so, while in Kano State, Mr. Chukudi is a non-indigenous person. He is non-indigenous. I hope that is clear. With time, you will see the pictures. Mr. Chukudi is non-indigenous. I said non-indigenous people are the people who who are living in the state, but they are not natives. They could have been living there for many years, giving birth to their children, doing businesses. They can even build their houses there, but that does not make them to be natives. For example, I have a friend. She grew up in Ondo State. All her life, she was born and brought up in Ondo State. But her parents are from Edo State. But she grew up in Ondo State. So she could speak Yoruba language very well. But I was asking her, so which state do you now come from? Are you a Yoruba girl? She said, no. I said, why? But you said you come from Ondo State. She said, yes, that she's not an indigene of Ondo State, that her parents are from Edo State. So she is not a native of Ondo State, even though she was born there, even though she grew up there. Her grandparents and her parents are from Edo State, and so she is an indigene of Edo State. I hope that is clear. Now, the third type of indigenous people is the indigene by marriage. Say that again. Indigene by marriage. A woman who is married into a community or married into a state is an indigene of that state by marriage. For example, if an Edo man travels to, let's say, Bauchi State to get a wife, an Hausa lady as a wife, by marriage, that Hausa lady will now be answering her husband's name. Assuming the man that went to marry an Hausa lady is Mr. Osarieme, for example. So Mr. Osarieme goes to marry Miriam in Bauchi State. Miriam's name will now be Miriam Osarieme. So by marriage, her surname changes from whatever she was bearing to Osarieme. And so by marriage, she's now an indigene of Edo State, where her husband comes from. I hope you are getting it little by little. Okay, so let's go over the types of indigenous people again. Number one, we say the natural indigenous people, that they are the original natives or the real indigenes whose great-grandparents and grandparents and parents were born and brought up in that state. Okay? Then the non-indigenous people. These are people who are living in a state, but they are not natives of that state. They only traveled from their own native state or from their own native community to come and live in another state. All right? Then, thirdly, the indigene by marriage. When a man travels from his own native state to go and marry somebody from another state, that woman automatically becomes an indigene of his own state. A woman who is married into a community or into a state is an indigene of that state into which she is married. Is that clear? All right, so in our next lesson, we are going to be talking about how to identify the different indigenous people of the states that make up Nigeria. Until then, remain beautiful, obedient children. Bye.